Could you ever imagine an army where the personal guard of a Jewish ruler is made up of Muslims, not enemies, not spies, but elite warriors, loyal, brave, and indispensable in battle? Today this seems unthinkable, but such things have happened in history. They were called Arsiyah, and they were the shield of the Khazar Khaganate. Who were they? Where did they come from? And why was the ruler's fate in their hands? Welcome to the Amazing History Channel, where we bring forgotten pages of the past back to life. And today we will tell you about one of the most mysterious military formations of the Middle Ages, the Muslim Guard of the Khazar Khagan. This is a story about people who lived between worlds, Islamic and Jewish, steppe and urban. Stick with us, it'll be interesting. Arsiyah is not just the name of a guard. It's a word with a deep meaning that even scholars don't fully understand. In Arabic sources, it is rendered differently. Arsiyah, Arsiyah, Al-Arsiyah. According to one version, it comes from the Arabic root ares. In various contexts and interpretations, this root was associated with closeness, service at court, as well as with adornment and care. Hence, the possible meanings are close one or even guard. These meanings perfectly reflect the essence of the military caste, which not only protected the Khagan but also became his closest circle. These people weren't Khazars. They arrived in Khazaria from elsewhere. In 10th century Arab chronicles, such as the works of al-Masudi, it is said that the Arsiyah came from Khwarezm. Other sources mention Derbent, Pelisi, lands of the Iranian cultural sphere, and even Bulgaria. They were Muslims, Arabs, Persians, and possibly Turks, seeking refuge and a fresh start. The reasons for their exodus were tragic and typical for the Middle Ages: prolonged wars, changes of dynasties, instability in the Islamic East, but especially epidemics. The mass plague that broke out after the first centuries of Islam devastated Khwarezm and certain regions. Those who survived sought refuge in more stable regions, such as Khazaria. The Khazar Khaganate, although outwardly barbaric, was distinguished by its unique religious and cultural policy. Jews, Christians, Muslims, and pagans lived side by side here. The Khagan was a pragmatist. He needed loyal and well-trained warriors. He offered the Muslim settlers a deal. They would have the right to openly practice their faith, build mosques, call to prayer, and even hold high government positions in exchange for their service. This is how Arsiyah came into being, not as an ethnic group but as a military caste. According to researchers, it included descendants of mercenary settlers and possibly even freed slaves. They were settled near the palace, lived under special conditions, and became an integral part of the ruler's guard. Moreover, the Khagan trusted them more than his own tribesmen. Thus began the story of those who became the Muslim guard of the Jewish king. The Arsiyah were not just settlers. They became the military elite, the backbone of the Khagan's personal guard. And this was evident not only in their status but also in their appearance. The equipment of the Arsiyah was worthy of their role as the ruler's shield and sword. The Arsiyah warriors were clad in chainmail, which provided great flexibility and mobility, something that was considered a major advantage in battle. Chainmail appeared among the Khazars in the late 7th century and evolved into full iron chainmail shirts by the mid-8th century. Additionally, iron breastplates and leather armor were used, providing extra protection. The helmets of Khazar warriors ranged from simple conical shapes to more complex spheroconical forms, with aventails that protected the neck and shoulders. Arsiyah's main weapon was the bow, which allowed them to fight effectively at a distance. In addition, the warriors used long spears, swords, sabers, maces, and battle axes. Such a variety of weapons allowed Arsiyah to be effective both in ranged and close combat. But it wasn't just about the weapons. Their role in the state gave their equipment symbolic meaning. These were warriors who were constantly near the palace. According to the same al-Masudi, the number of Arsiyah was about 7,000 horsemen. Their quarters were located right next to the Khagan's residence, and whenever he traveled, they always accompanied him in times of danger. They were the first to stand between the enemy and the throne. The Arsiyah were not just bodyguards. Their armor shone not only with metal, but also with the trust that could be more dangerous than any weapon. And precisely because the Khagan relied on them more than on his own people, their every appearance was a demonstration of strength, loyalty, and political calculation. The Arsiyah couldn't just be armed settlers. To join the Khagan's personal guard, you had to be the best. Their military training, although not necessarily described directly in the sources, was most likely based on the Islamic tradition of warrior training brought from the south, from Khwarezm, Iran, and the Caspian cities. While the Khazar army as a whole included nomadic mercenary units of various origins, the Arsiyah stood out for their discipline and well-structured military organization. It is possible that their training reflected elements of the Arab military system, where from an early age they were taught horseback riding, weapon handling, and the tactics of coordinated cavalry actions. This can be compared to the military practices of the Buyids or the Khwarezmian dynasties, where there was a tradition of creating units of professional mercenaries trained no worse than the army of the Caliphate. Cavalry was the heart of Arsiyah. They were taught to fight in the saddle, shoot at full gallop, maneuver in tight formation, and suddenly change the direction of attack. A mounted archer is the pinnacle of medieval military skill, and Arsiyah possessed this skill except for Luka. A key part of their training involved close combat with sabers, short swords, and spears. The ability to fight in close combat without losing composure or breaking formation was critical for the guard, whose main task was to protect the Khagan at the most dangerous moment. They may have trained with a system blending steppe survival skills and Islamic military doctrines. Life near the Khagan's court did not mean peace. On the contrary, it meant constant training, demonstrations, and loyalty checks. Arsiyah had to be not just strong, they had to be perfect. Arsiyah were not just elite bodyguards, they were a combat tool capable of acting quickly, precisely, and with discipline. Their tactics reflected their unique position in the state. Muslims in the army of the Jewish Khagan, fighting for a state whose interests did not always align with the Islamic world. Arab sources emphasize one important point. Arsiyah did not fight against other Muslims. In such cases, they would stand aside from the main troops, demonstrating loyalty to their faith but without breaking their agreement with the Khagan. This required special tactical flexibility to maintain combat readiness but not to engage in conflict with fellow believers. However, against Christian, pagan, and rebellious enemies of Khazaria, Arsiyah acted decisively. Their main strength lay in mobility and speed. Like all steppe-type cavalry, they probably made wide use of hit-and-run tactics, swift raids, sudden attacks, flanking maneuvers, and pursuit of retreating enemies. They could quickly break through enemy lines and just as quickly withdraw, avoiding prolonged battles. Arsiyah played a special role in guarding the Khagan's headquarters and accompanying him on campaigns. They formed the innermost ring of protection for the ruler, stood watch in field camps, guarded the routes, and patrolled the surrounding areas. In battles, Arsiyah could serve as a shock vanguard or, on the contrary, remain in reserve, guarding the central part of the army where the Khagan was located. This tactic made them a versatile unit. They were ready for a swift attack, for defense, for guard duty. But most importantly, they were predictably loyal and reliable. In a multi-confessional state, this meant no less than valor in battle. Arsiyah were not ordinary soldiers. They were the elite, the backbone that the Khagan relied on in the most troubled times. Their service extended beyond the military into politics, greatly increasing their significance. According to the records of al-Masudi, Arsiyah were not just warriors, but trusted people of the Khagan. One of them, Ahmad ibn Kuya, took the position of vizier, essentially the head of the executive power at the court. He was a Muslim and a representative of the Arsiyah, and his appointment became a kind of confirmation of the agreements. Muslims received freedom of religion and participation in governance in exchange for service and loyalty. Integrating the Arsiyah into the Khaganate's political system increased stability. They became intermediaries between the Muslim part of the population and the authorities, introduced elements of Middle Eastern administrative culture, and could act as advisors on religious matters, especially in relations with Muslim countries. A clear example of the Arsiyah's involvement in military actions and political intrigue was a specific event. In 1913, one of the largest and bloodiest Rus' campaigns against the Caspian took place. Their fleet of about 500 ships and 50,000 warriors arrived at the Kerch Strait, controlled by the Khazars. The Rus' offered the Khagan a deal to allow them to pass along the Volga and raid the Muslim Caspian territories, in exchange for which they promised him half of the loot. The Khagan had ongoing conflicts with the Muslims. By the way, there's a big episode about this on our channel. And he didn't mind making some extra money from this, so he agreed easily. After sailing down the Volga, the Rus entered the Caspian Sea and launched raids. Gilan, Deilam, Tabaristan, Abaskun, Aran, and Shirvan on the southern coast were plundered, shocking the local population with the violence. Al-Masudi writes that people had not seen such horror since ancient times. The Rus even repelled a Muslim counterattack off the coast of modern-day Baku, drowning and killing thousands of fighters. The Rus stayed on the captured islands off the coast for months, until the loot and resources began to run out. On the way back, after fulfilling the agreement and giving the Khagan his share of the loot, the Rus hoped for a safe return. However, Arsiyah demanded revenge for the fallen fellow believers. The Khagan found himself in a dilemma. On one hand, he couldn't ignore the demands of his guards, but on the other hand, he was in league with the Rus. He could not or did not prevent the attack, but according to rumors, he secretly warned the Rus. Nevertheless, in the Volokonodan area, the Khazar cavalry, about 15,000 horsemen supported by local Christians, attacked the Rus. It appears that Arsiyah also took part in this battle. The battle lasted 3 days, with only around 5,000 Rus escaping. The rest died or were killed returning home. Al-Masudi estimated up to 30,000 Rus were killed. Afterward, Rus raids on the Caspian Sea ceased for decades. This episode clearly shows that the Arsiyah were not only fighters, they were also involved in reconnaissance, planning, and diplomatic maneuvers. Their knowledge of world history, languages, and customs made them indispensable in negotiations, espionage, and palace intrigues. The Arsi story ended as mysteriously as it began. Sources are mentioned less often in 11th century chronicles and eventually disappear. There was no great battle marking their fall, nor any chronicles of their departure. Their vanishing was as mysterious as their arrival. Why Arsia disappeared, part of the Khazar Khaganate's fate. Since the end of the 10th century, the state began to be torn apart by contradictions, pressure from the south by Muslim states, attacks from the north by Rus, and internal strife. In 965, Prince Sviatoslav strikes Khazaria, destroying its major cities, including Itil, and wipes out its military infrastructure. After that, the Khaganate never recovers in its former form, without a capital, without centralized power, without a stable Khagan, and the structure to which Arsia belonged also disappears. Their functions become meaningless and honesty loses support. Some may have returned to the Muslim world, to Derbent, Bulgaria, or Iran. Others, like thousands of other warriors at the turn of the eras, could have blended into the local population, becoming the ancestors of new communities. But even after disappearing, they left the mark of Arsi. This is a rare example of how, in the medieval world of religious wars and irreconcilable conflicts, Muslims could become the elite at the court of a Jewish ruler. Their story is a reminder that the boundaries between us and them are sometimes much more complicated than they seem, and that loyalty, discipline, and military skill sometimes meant more than origin and faith. That's all from me. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.